We're going to go over the community gardens. Now, many people have a little plot of land possibly in their backyard or on their property, whether it's containers, raised beds, or in-ground garden, and they can just walk out their back door and garden. But there are many people who do not have that benefit or that luxury of having that garden or that means close to their home. So community gardens are a essential item for many people in very urban settings in order to grow a garden, whether large or small.
Okay, so yes, there are community gardens for people that maybe can't grow in their yard. But there's also different types of community gardens where it's a beautification project for the community. So it might be like at a park or near a library or a school where you can get involved and you can volunteer. And that's a different type of community garden that is something that you can partake in.
Versus what we are maybe conditioned to think of a raised bed in a park with hundreds of other...
Yeah.
A plot, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or an allotment.
Yeah, what is the... And we hear this term in the European area, it's called allotments or allotment tiering.
Okay, so
what's the difference
typically
between...
is you are renting that space, but it's... Sometimes at a community garden, you might rent it per raised bed. So you might get like a 4x8 raised bed for X amount of money
per season,
and you can rent, I don't know if as many as you want to say, but maybe you want to rent 2 or 3 or whatever. An allotment, you're renting a portion of land. So
physical land in the ground.
And some of them you can have chickens on your allotment. Some of them you can put a shed, whatever. Most community gardens, if you're just getting the raised bed, that's what you have.
You're very limited to the items in which can be put on that property.
To use the garden.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's the difference. And most times an allotment is much more larger square footage than a community garden may be.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the benefits or what we need to know about.
So there's many reasons to join a community garden, especially if it is some sort of beautification project or even just if you're there to grow 45 tomato plants. You can meet people, which is kind of fun. You might meet people in your community, other gardeners that you can
trade wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah, you can.
That's what people used to do before the internet was invented. We used to talk to each other, and if we heard a story from Uncle Jim or neighbor Bobby from 30 years ago, you could kind of take it a little more truthful because you knew the person and you kind of knew whether or not they were a storyteller or they actually told the truth, and here's advice in which you can use in order to better
and also,
have your
just
garden.
Like, hey, by the way, my name is Jane, and I listen to this cool radio show,
right,
and you should listen to it too. And these people give gardening
You should do
talks.
that regardless if you have a community garden or not. Yeah,
right.
That's how we grow.
But what I'm saying
it's a whole
is
other
that
story. But
it's also other information,
yes,
like information that can apply to your gardening.
Yeah, don't do this.
Skills.
Last year I did this for carrots and it did not work. That type of advice.
Right, and then also you can use a community garden. Maybe you have a housing authority, HOA, whatever, and they're like, no, you cannot grow vegetables, which is ridiculous. But
that's another conversation for another. Yeah.
Or maybe you have a spouse or a partner that's like, I really don't want you growing that in our yard. So then you can seek out a community garden, or maybe you just have a bunch of shade and you don't have anywhere to grow.
Right, and there are people who grow in their backyard and also own or rent a community garden plot. They have both. For a variety of reasons that we've covered.
I think it's kind of neat that people want to branch out and maybe try something and be part of a community. So there's many benefits. One is it preserves green spaces. It provides teaching opportunity for children. You can definitely, if you have children, it's
and these community gardens, as well as farmers markets, typically have a children activity area or a learning type of schedule of some sort.
It typically reduces crime in that neighborhood. There's been, I don't have the exact statistics, but if it's
there are reports that show
that it is a reduction of crime. It makes neighborhoods more beautiful. It's very environmentally friendly. It's going to increase pollination typically in the area because you're growing those plants that pollinators like. It provides opportunities for all sorts of people to grow food, and it builds self-esteem. You're like, look at me, I grew this tomato. I'm excited. I'm proud of what I did.
And people may think, let's take your reference of a community garden, of a plot or a raised bed of a 4x8. That's 32 square feet. Now, many people, or a majority of people, may think that's not very much space to grow in. I need, 100 square feet or 500 square feet, and that's simply not the case. If you have a raised bed of 32 square feet or 64, something in that nature, and you've brought in good compost to fill that bed, you can produce a tremendous amount, if not more, in that raised bed in that same square footage as you would in the ground, because the soil is the lifeblood of the plants. You've got good soil. You've got a good foundation for those plants to be grown in, rather than whatever the native soil is that you may have in your backyard. And it's easy to control, it's easy to maintain psychologically. Hey, I only have to do this instead of this raised bed, instead of this whole backyard of weeding or soil workage or tillage or whatever the case may be there.
Right. And I think another thing is it gets you out of the house. Maybe if you have something that's in your backyard, you're like, oh, I'll just deal with it another day. If you're paying for something it's not like it's a lot of money, but if you're paying for something and you've invested your time, you're going to continue to go back to it. Typically.
Yeah. And the money thing is minimal and a very small amount for the return in which you get, not only for the production and the produce wise, but for the experience in which you are going to gather as well.
And you may think, okay, Are there a lot of community gardens? I'm not really sure. There's probably not one in my area.
I don't see it online on TV.
Nobody's ever told me this. I've been living in this neighborhood for 15 years. You'd be surprised. I know, like, you and I see them a lot. We'll see what looks like community gardens when we're driving around.
And a community garden is not a one block size. It can be just a where an old house used to be, and the neighborhood has created raised beds, and it's a community garden there. It doesn't have to be what you may think,
like
or
an acres upon acres,
like a PBS style television program where you would think it's acres of hundreds and hundreds of raised beds. Those do exist, but for the normal everyday urban setting, it's a dozen here, a dozen there, not that many raised beds.
Right. So now is your time to research this, or maybe not necessarily now, but over winter, whatever.
Sometimes there is a waiting list for these raised beds and allotments, in which allotment tiering over in the Europe area, there is sometimes a 5 to 10 year waiting list in order to get the opportunity to have an allotment. And in some urban settings in the United States, there is a waiting list. You're hoping that, and about the only way sometimes you get a raised bed at a community garden or an allotment is the unfortunate of the passing away of a gardener, and then that goes up for reinstatement for a new ownership of that particular plot or garden. That's just the way it works.
Different type of compost.
Yeah. Well, but that's how it works sometimes. There's that waiting list.
Right. So you can find your garden through many things. Maybe your neighbors, if they don't know, that's okay. Co-workers sometimes, local university extensions.
You don't know what you don't know until you ask people.
And that's very true. Like, you might be sitting next to somebody who does an entire business and knows how to community garden, but at work, and you don't even know that. You want to check with your local university extension.
I don't know is the worst answer you can get.
Right. You can walk around your community, and if you see something, you can definitely look into that. Sometimes people at churches they go to church with somebody, they might know. There's a website called localharvest.org. If you've never been to that website, it has all sorts of information, anything from farmers markets to pick your own to getting CSAs, whatever. And there's also
great foundational website to start you on your journey to find basically anything you need in that realm.
Right. But they do have community gardens listed there. There's something called the American Community Garden Association. I had no idea that existed until I was researching this. So you can go there. Meetups, if you're not familiar with the Meetup app, you can meet people in your community through groups. There are community gardening groups on Meetup. And then just like sometimes your local garden center, maybe they don't know, but they can point you in the right direction.
Yeah. So if you've never had a community garden, if you've never had an allotment, if you're in the Europe area and you're listening, you can certainly find out what is going to work best for you in order to get the community garden or plot that you may want because you don't have one or unable to get one in or grow in your backyard. And it's a lot of information, a lot of great experience, and can get a lot of produce, and you can trade with your other gardeners in your community garden.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.